A mother and her 3 children were killed, and over 50 others, mostly children, were injured in a tragic crash between a bus and several vehicles in the Galilee region in the north of Israel on Wednesday. As we're returning home from the end of the Sukkot holiday Wednesday afternoon, a bus carrying dozens of children in the Bnei Akiva youth movement collided with several vehicles, leaving at least 5 people dead. According to initial reports, the bus veered off course, hitting a van and a cab before flipping over onto its side. Magen David Adom said that 4 people inside the car were pronounced dead at the scene. 35-year-old Moran Ben Eli, along with her 3 children, Dekel, Liam, and Anael, ages 15, 11, and 5. Their husband and father, Reuven, who was also in the car, is hospitalized in serious condition. He regained consciousness Thursday morning and was told the devastating news of his family's death. The 5th casualty was found crushed underneath the bus and also pronounced dead. He was later identified as the bus driver, 76-year-old Ashel Basson. Additionally, an 11-year-old girl and another boy are hospitalized in critical condition, and dozens more are in light to moderate condition. Countless emergency response units, including those of Magen David Adom, Fire and Rescue Services, and United Hatzalah, were called to the scene to tend to the victims. And IDF medical workers and Israeli Air Force helicopters were also brought in to assist in the evacuation of injured to hospitals. Police are still investigating the cause of the accident, as it still remains unclear what caused the bus to swerve out of its lane. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett also addressed the crash upon his return home from New York and spoke to authorities at the scene. Quote, "The heart breaks in light of the images from the difficult crash in the Upper Galilee. I ask to send my condolences from the bottom of my heart and a big hug to the families of those killed during this difficult time. The people of Israel are praying for the recovery of the victims," the Prime Minister said in a statement. He also called on the Israeli public to exercise extra caution and to drive safely and carefully. As tensions continue to escalate, a Palestinian terrorist was shot and killed Thursday morning after she attempted to stab police officers in the Old City of Jerusalem. According to the police, the woman exited the chain gate from the Temple Mount, pulled out a knife, and attempted to stab several officers standing in the vicinity. The officers, in response, opened fire, killing her. None of the policemen were injured. She was later identified as a 30-year-old resident of the town of Kabatia near Jenin in the West Bank. Also on Thursday morning, a Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist was killed after firing at Israeli security forces in the village of Bulkin, also near Jenin. The incident took place as Israeli forces conducted a nightly raid to arrest suspected terrorists. During the operation, clashes broke out, and the Palestinian, identified as 22-year-old Ala Nasser Zayud of the Al-Quds Brigades, the military wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist group, was shot and killed after he opened fire on the Israeli forces. His weapon, a machine gun, was confiscated. Earlier this week, 5 Palestinians were killed and 2 Israeli soldiers severely wounded in clashes in the Jenin area. Israeli security forces have been carrying out a series of raids in the West Bank designed to put a stop to Hamas terrorist cell activities that Israeli authorities have said were planning to carry out terrorist attacks on Israeli citizens and civilians. Moving on, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett returning to Israel Wednesday night from New York, following his first address to the UN General Assembly. As Bennett sought to make his mark on the world stage without any gimmicks, he discussed topics such as the coronavirus, Iran, relations with the West, and the Arab world, though failed to mention the Palestinians even once. So now joining us with analysis is former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations and chairman of the World Likud, Dani Danon. Welcome.
Thank you for having me again.
So first of all, what did you think of the Prime Minister's first address to the UN General Assembly?
Well, like you mentioned, after a decade, we heard a speech from a different prime minister, which is not Prime Minister Netanyahu. So many people wanted to see the differences between the prime ministers. What I heard in the speech was that there are 2 main things that the prime minister decided not to speak about them. The first is the issue of the Palestinians. Any dialogue or peace agreement or negotiations, he ignored completely the issue without even mentioning even once the Palestinian issue. The second point is the Iran deal, the JCPOA. Prime Minister Bennett did speak about the threats coming from Iran with their proxies and with their nuclear ambitions, but he never spoke about the JCPOA and the intentions to renew the agreement that was signed in 2015. So I think that was very interesting to see that he's actually keeping the important core issues not to the whole of the General Assembly. Maybe he prefers to do it in a different way.
So he didn't address two very important topics, but what did he hope to accomplish with this speech? I mean, what was the tone or the message that you felt that he hoped to convey?
But I think he made a strong point regarding Iran, and that Israel is committed to prevent Iran from becoming nuclear. But, you know, we have to look at the reality. For the past decade, we heard many speeches coming from different directions. And at the same time, the Iranians continue with their plans, with their ambitions. So I'm worried about the future because we know speeches are important, but are not enough. So I hope we will see concrete steps taken by the government, lobbying other governments, and trying to put some sanctions against the regime of Tehran.
Now, I mean, Bennett tried very hard to avoid the graphs and the photos or gimmicks, as they've been called, as his predecessor, Benjamin Netanyahu, is so well known for. And we all remember the graphic of the bomb. It was simple and yet very memorable. I mean, will Bennett's speech be remembered in your opinion? And were his points on Iran strong enough?
So I think from the beginning, the Prime Minister tried to downgrade his speech. Unlike former Prime Minister Netanyahu, who always wanted to create a build-up for the speech. He promised a sensation, a revelation. It didn't happen this time. On the contrary, Prime Minister Bennett said that nothing will be used. There will be no dramas during the speech. So you cannot actually come and say it's like an important moment that we can quote from the speech. Maybe he did it in order to make the distinction between him and Prime Minister Netanyahu. From my experience as the ambassador for 5 years at the UN, it's very effective. It's very effective to bring a picture, to reveal new information. And I used to argue a lot with the intelligence of the military that they will actually allow me to present information. I know that people remember when you bring something new to the table.
Now, we talked a little bit about what was missing from Bennett's speech, but what were perhaps some of the highlights, in your opinion?
No, I think that the way he described the leadership of Tehran today, it was very effective and precise, and it clarified to the world with whom we are dealing. Because when we saw the Tehran putting a statement a few days before the opening of the General Assembly, that soon they will re-enter the negotiations in Vienna. So I think the Prime Minister actually explained that we are dealing with a regime that actually murdered thousands of people and celebrated after that. I think that was a very important point.
Now, it's been said by several critics that Bennett still didn't take a hard enough stance on Iran, especially when compared to some of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's former speeches. What are your thoughts on this?
So my opinion is that we have to address the elephant in the room. What is the position of Israel regarding the JCPOA, the agreement that was signed in 2015? From what I know, the government is against the agreement. And I think we should say it out loud. Why we are against the agreement? Because it doesn't allow any serious inspections. It allows Iran to conduct ballistic missile tests. It allows them to continue with the enrichment of uranium. And they can still send billions of US dollars to their proxies. I think we should have spoken about this issue. I think the Prime Minister should have actually addressed this issue. And he chose, maybe because he didn't want to embarrass the new administration, he chose not to address those issues. I think we have no other choice but to speak and to present our point.
All right, Ambassador Dani Danon, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and offer your analysis today.
Thank you very much.
Continuing with the UN General Assembly, it seems not all is green between the U.S. and the Middle East. According to a report released by the news site Axios, President Biden denied the request of the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to meet during his visit to the UN or in the White House. Thus, Abbas's decision in not coming to the assembly, but sending a speech via video. While this, according to the White House, happened due to scheduling issues, it still raises a lot of flags as to whether or not the U.S. is taking this issue seriously. And joining us now to explain is ILTV reporter Asaf Nissan. Asaf, welcome. So, I mean, why is this considered such an issue that Biden would not meet with Abbas?
Mostly, the issue, of course, is technical, according to the White House. But what we are seeing is very unusual because I don't think there's been a U.S. president, besides President Trump, of course, that did not meet with the Palestinian leader throughout the bilateral meetings in the UNGA. This, of course, raises an issue on the Palestinian side, thinking that Biden is not taking him seriously and putting the conflict in a low place in their foreign policy list. Of course, in the U.S. perspective, of course, it's a 100% scheduling issue because we know the U.S. is also driving to reopen the mission in Jerusalem. Thus, of course, not changing its policy. We're seeing this as the same act as before, and Biden, of course, himself committed again to this two-state solution in the UNGA.
Now, according to a speech, President Abbas said at the UN that he expects Israel to withdraw from the West Bank and end the quote-unquote occupation in 1 year. Could this be done? And how would the U.S. administration support such a move?
Well, first of all, I'm not seeing this happening in any sorts of scenario. And honestly, we have a very right-wing prime minister. We have a right-wing opposition. This vote, and even the opposition itself, this will not carry. I think even by 2/3 it won't carry. So I'm not seeing this as any option in the future, plus all the financial, logistical, and issues on that plate, of course, will be impossible to handle because Israel will have to pretty much take in almost 500,000 people back into the region, so back into its borders. So it's going to be even harder. And of course, the U.S. won't support it 100% because we do have a widespread division, of course, between the Republicans and Democrats. And even there, some of the Democrats won't support that move from Israel because they all see it as part of tearing up from the Holy Land. So I'm not seeing this happening in any way. Of course, we cannot be sure yet with Lapid, but at least with Bennett's government.
Exactly. It seems that Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, it doesn't seem likely that will happen under him, especially since he said earlier this month and many times that he is not interested in meeting with President Abbas. Yet 2 ministers of his government now are set to meet with Abbas. So what's going on there?
So first of all, I'm not seeing this as something new. This is not, would some say, even a rebellion. This is more of I don't want to say cooperation towards peace or any re-recognition, but we are seeing first signs of talks between the sides. And of course, the 2 ministers themselves are from Meretz, Health Minister Nitzan Horowitz and Deputy Minister Isawi Fridge. They're both were invited to meet up with Mahmoud Abbas. Now, this is not a surprise because Meretz has always been for the two-state solution. They were always in favor of the separation, and they were just keeping their mandate with it. Of course, during previous administrations, Meretz was in the opposition, and Abbas did meet up with them. This is nothing out of the ordinary.
All right, well, we'll keep an eye on this. Asaf Nissan, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much.
Foreign Minister Yair Lapid arrived in Bahrain on Thursday in the highest-level official Israeli visit to the kingdom since the countries established formal relations last year. Lapid landed in the country on an Israel plane with an olive branch painted on it. While there, he sat down for a meeting with Bahrain's crown prince in the first public sit-down. Lapid was invited to the kingdom by his Bahraini counterpart to inaugurate Israel's embassy in Manama. Additionally, the 2 countries will sign a series of bilateral agreements during the visit. The historic visit follows Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's meeting with Bahrain and United Arab Emirates ministers in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly this past week. This was the first such meeting since he took office in June.
Folks, I'm so very happy to meet you. It's I felt it's important that we meet after to signal the year of the Abraham Accords, which, from our perspective, is very meaningful. It's first of all, I want to tell you that I met the King of Jordan and the President of Egypt, and they're of course delighted with the ensuing relationship between our countries, and I think I want to assure you of continuity. We're stable and we believe in this relationship, and we want to expand it as much as possible.
Meanwhile, also making history on Thursday, the first direct commercial flight from Bahrain landed in Israel. Gulf Air touched down at Ben Gurion Airport at around 1 p.m. local time, departing from the capital of Manama. The new route takes a little under 3 hours and will now operate twice a week. The plane was received with a traditional watery welcome. And speaking of Israeli-Arab ties, just 1 year after the signing of the Abraham Accords, Israel is set to take part in the Expo 2020 Dubai, set to officially open on Friday, October 1st. This marks the first time the World Expo is taking place in the Middle East and the first time that Israel is participating in such an event in an Arab country. And so here to discuss the significance and to offer a glimpse into the Israeli pavilion is Menachem Gantz, spokesman of Israel's pavilion at the Expo, joining us now from Dubai.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
First of all, for those who are unfamiliar, can you briefly tell us about the Dubai Expo?
Well, the Expo in general is the first one, I guess, started in 1851. Most of you probably remember that the Tour Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower in Paris, is due to an Expo event in Paris. The last Expo was held in Milan in 2015. And this actually one, as you mentioned, had to start a year ago in 2020. And due to the COVID, was delayed in 1 year. And it's the first time that the Expo arrives to the Middle East. So it's a big thing. It's a big thing for the United Arab Emirates. They invested and built in 5 years a city where all 191 pavilions are already expecting all the guests and all the visitors to come and visit them. It's a great enthusiasm and it's a unique opportunity for all nations to gather in one spot and to look forward for facing the challenges of the 21st century.
What is the significance of Israel's participation in the World Fair in Dubai?
Well, you know, I had the privilege to host tens of journalists this week on Monday as a pre-tour to our pavilion. And I told them it's history. Not every day someone wakes up in the morning and is part of history and he's fulfilling a dream. Who could ever think that Israel will participate? We're talking about our pavilion that is sponsored by 17 different ministries of the Israeli government. It's led by the Israeli MFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this unique pavilion is a showcase for what Israel is about and what Israel contributes for the world. And who could ever think that we will have such a platform in an Arabic country? And I think that's also the news of this Expo. We see how Israel presents the hope, and it's a hope for the region. So people come in and they say, wow, actually, why it never happened before? Why we should think different? And we see that if we find the collaboration and we find the ground for our common work together, that's definitely a platform for the future. And our future is such that, and this is also the theme of our pavilion. The theme of our pavilion is Toward Tomorrow.
It's a meaningful message. And can you also perhaps give us a glimpse into the Israeli pavilion? What is Israel showcasing to the world?
Well, our pavilion is an open pavilion. It was designed by architect David Knaffo and AVS company that realized this pavilion. And they thought of, let's make an open pavilion. Let me remind you that the invitation to participate in the Expo arrived years before the Abraham Accords. So it was planned to have public that had maybe fear or hesitating to get into the Israeli pavilion. And they choose to make our pavilion as an open one. So we show how alike we are, and we show it through the typography. Israel is like dunes and sand. Both Israel and the United Arab Emirates are countries that are coming from the desert, from sand, and very limited climate opportunities, and nevertheless reached where they are today. And as much as you go in the dune, as much as you get into the pavilion, you get to, with the message of collaboration, toward tomorrow, where you see a sign in Aravrit, which is bilingual of Hebrew and Arabic. Aravit and Ivrit. And this sign that combines the two languages together show exactly how alike we are and how important for us to collaborate toward tomorrow.
Menachem Gantz, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
In coronavirus news, Israel continues to see signs that the fourth wave of the coronavirus is subsiding, just as Israeli children return to school on Thursday morning after nearly a month's hiatus due to Jewish holidays. Let's take a look at the report. On Thursday morning, some 2 million Israeli pupils returned to the classrooms, but not before taking a home rapid antigen test the night before. According to the Health Ministry, some 1.4 million antigen tests were picked up by families from Magen David Adom, with more than 90% of children eventually undergoing home testing before returning to school. Teachers and principals were ordered not to allow children in without a signed declaration from parents that they had conducted the test. Currently, if a student tests positive for COVID-19, this forces all classmates into a minimum of 1 week quarantine. Though a new pilot program, which is set to launch in 300 classrooms, will swap quarantine with daily coronavirus testing for 1 week. If successful, the pilot program will expand to all schools. Meanwhile, some 100,000 students remain in quarantine. And on Sunday, new Green Pass policy changes will take effect. Under the new guidelines, Green Passes will expire unless citizens receive vaccine booster shots 6 months after their second doses. But that means that more than 1 million Israelis will lose their passes overnight on Sunday, and among them almost half of the nation's educators. It remains unclear what will happen with schools then. Additionally, N12 Hebrew News Channel reported Wednesday night that anyone without a green pass will now also have to go into quarantine if exposed to an infected person, also calling into question the impact on Israel's economy. In light of all these questions, the coronavirus cabinet is set to meet on Sunday after a months-long hiatus. This as the health ministry reported a decline in serious cases on Thursday morning. According to the ministry, there are 639 patients in serious condition, and of those, 94% are not vaccinated at all, while 6% are fully vaccinated with all 3 doses. The ministry also announced that over 3 million Israelis have received the 3rd dose of the vaccine. While this is seemingly good news, there are population groups in Israel that are lagging behind, mainly in the Arab population, where vaccination rates are extremely low. Currently, some 50 Arab towns are red zones, according to the traffic light system. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett reiterated this past week that the focus should be on efforts to vaccinate the Arab and other population groups, and not on introducing new restrictions to the Israeli public, as suggested by health officials, whom he derided in a series of comments. And so now, with tensions running high, the cabinet will have to decide on Israel's future strategy in dealing with the pandemic. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be cool, with lows reaching 49 degrees Fahrenheit or 9 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect more of the same, clear to partly cloudy skies and daily highs of roughly 85 Fahrenheit or 29 degrees Celsius. And now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. An original way. All right, well, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.22 shekels to the American dollar and 2.53 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Ladar Gavelazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.